Hello, I'm Graham Jans. I'm a designer, a game designer and developer. Oh. Hello. Yeah, I'm a game designer and developer. I work at an amazing studio called Clay Entertainment since 2013, 2012 it says there. And I've been a professional game designer since 2006, where I've worked on a variety of AAA, casual, and independent games. Recently I've made games like Don't Starve Together, and Oxygen Not Included, which is the game I'll be talking about today. I'm active in all aspects of game development, including design, programming, production, UX, community management, 3D artwork. Basically, I just can't see a process without wanting to learn more about it. In fact, I'm interested in basically everything. My list of hobbies is incredibly long. It gets longer all the time. That's just a small sample up there. I love stepping out of my boundaries and learning something new. And that's why I'm really excited to be talking at builderscon here. I'm hoping that I can teach you something outside of your boundaries, that you can learn something new. And this talk is about a game that reached beyond its boundaries as entertainment and became a tool for learning. That game is Oxygen Not Included. And I'm proud to say that we've created a game which is highly entertaining, but even more importantly, this is a game which inspires players to actually learn and practice science. So it all started with a simple question. Can we teach people a little bit of science, maybe without them realizing while they're playing our game? Well, 5 years and 1.5 million players later, we've discovered the answer is yes. It turns out we can teach people with our game. I've been making games for a long time, but everything I had worked on previously had been produced just for entertainment. Then Oxygen Not Included came along, and I realized that I could meaningfully impact the world with the things that I'm creating. Realizing this was incredible. It made me incredibly happy to be able to entertain and teach people at the same time. And I'm really excited to share that with you today, to share the journey of that with you. So let me introduce Oxygen Not Included, for those of you who haven't played it. By the way, throughout this presentation, I'll probably call it ONI a lot. That's what we call it in the team. It's easier to say. But let me start with the trailer so that you can get a feel for the game. So Oxygen Not Included is made by a small team at Clay Entertainment, and we've been working on it for over 5 years. It just launched in July, and we're still continuing to develop it post-launch. For those who haven't played it, here's the idea. These are duplicants. They're little people like you and me who breathe in oxygen and breathe out carbon dioxide. You must guide a small crew of duplicants and help them to survive and establish a colony from scratch deep in the heart of a strange asteroid. The asteroid is filled with unusual biomes and bizarre creatures, but also familiar materials like water, copper, and hydrogen. Taking care of the duplicants depends on exploring those biomes, and building technology and infrastructure to exploit the resources there and ensure the survival of the colony. It's a game of many interlocking systems that the player has to understand and balance to survive. Many of the systems are inspired by real physical systems, respiration, electrochemistry, ecological cycles, and more. It contains a robust physics simulation using cellular automata, which allows us to simulate heat diffusion, liquid and gas flow, phases of matter, and more. And it does this in real time on consumer hardware. And importantly, it's an open-ended game with many ways to solve a problem, many ways to fail, and many ways to try again differently. Ultimately, the colony's survival depends on discovering and exploiting the game systems using science and engineering principles in order for players to survive. Today I'm going to dive deep into three things in order to show you how we created a game that inspires science. First, I'll explain what I mean by inspire science. Then I'm going to explain in detail what our design principles were and how we put them into action. We'll take a close look at one particular system in the game. And then I'll explain the outcome of all this, what players actually learned from the game. I'd also like to emphasize this was not a rigorous experiment, but we approached the game with an intention, and I'm going to describe how we executed that intention, what results we saw, and the conclusions that we drew from it. So let's take a look at that first point, inspiring science. This is our ideal outcome for players of this game, to be inspired to do science. But what do I mean by science? Well, I mean analyzing, studying, and researching. I mean hypothesizing and experimenting, doing things like model building and abstracting, and then taking those abstract models and adapting them back to reality, integrating them with real systems, and learning from the results and going back to the drawing board. If a person is inspired to do something, it means that they're internally motivated and they're compelled to do a thing. We're not just trying to teach people facts about science. We want to teach them about doing acts of science. We want people to be doing science in these ways as an unavoidable part of their lives. So this means we need to teach them about doing science and give them the motivation to do it. So how do we do that? How does a game teach anyone anything? Well, actually games are inherently about learning. After all, one of your first goals when you pick up a game is to learn how to play it, right? And so broadly, this is how games teach people. First, games offer opportunities to learn, and then they provide motivation to do the learning. When a game does these things, people spontaneously start learning. And I'd say these things are essential to making a successful game. But players are merely learning how to play that game well. In order for it to be meaningful, players have to learn something that's worthwhile beyond the game. So all three of these things are part of our design, but I really want to pay attention to how we create meaningful experiences in Oxygen Not Included. Getting started on the project, our main goal was to make a commercially successful game. Clay is a commercial studio, and we want to make fun, rewarding entertainment so that lots of people play our games and enjoy them. But creating a great game increases our audience. The more people that play our game, and the more time they spend playing, the more they become invested in it, and in the fun and the fiction, and then they open themselves up to learning from us. Because if no one ever bought it, we would have no chance to teach them, right? It's not very usual for a commercial game to consider what life skills a player is learning from it. But at the beginning of Oxygen Not Included's development, one of my teammates simply asked that question: can we teach people science? He just wanted to see if we could cram some science into the game And maybe if people started asking questions or remembered a few facts, then that'd be great. And so we set out making a game that tried to include some kind of science in it. But the core developers were very passionate about this, and much of the game itself was directly inspired by science, right from the start. But our effort to actually teach this science developed slowly. We didn't have a formal process. We just played around with natural systems and thought about how they might turn into gameplay. Over the course of the project, there was a particular way of approaching a problem that we kept doing. That approach was this. We defined some kind of real-world system, somewhere in physics, chemistry, or biology, that we felt would fit into the game and provide interesting gameplay. Once we had decided on that, we would try to capture the experience of that real-world system. What's the experience? That means looking at things like what the causes and effects of the system are, how the system moves when you push it, what its behavior is, its dominant patterns, its uses, and its dangers. These high-level things I call the experience of that system. Whatever the implementation ends up looking like, these are the targets that we actually have to hit. There's a strong urge to have technical accuracy, but that way lies madness. Focusing on the experience is much more useful for achieving our goals. So, we put this experience into the game, and players work to understand it, but it's not yet meaningful. In Oxygen Not Included, as in all games, players will come across new concepts that they haven't thought about before. And in order to progress, they'll have to understand those concepts and develop models that they can reapply to the game to be successful. As I said earlier, this is how most games teach players. But what can Oni do to make that experience meaningful? How can the experience extend out of the game and into players' lives? Well, we did some research of our own to games that came before us to help answer this question. A particular game that inspired us is SimCity. Many people I know played this game as children. It has various models based on the real world, including municipal zoning, infrastructure development, taxes and budgeting concerns, and a model of how public services are demanded and funded. Talking to people who played this when they were children, now that they're adults, it's amazing to see how they have an easy grasp of each of these things in their lives. Basically, they've become good citizens of their cities. Well, SimCity is not an accurate simulation by any means, but it teaches people what the main pieces are that make a city function, and importantly, it teaches people how to develop models of municipal systems. They get practice doing that in the game so that they can apply it to their real lives. And there are many other games like this. The models in games like SimCity are not completely accurate to the real world. They make concessions for gameplay, accessibility, performance, and so on. But each game contains nuggets of truth, or develops real skills, or asks relevant questions about players' lives and their world. Like tiger cubs play fighting with each other to practice for hunting, players in these games are practicing for city planning, or for driving, or for strategizing, or whatever. In Oxygen Not Included, we want players to experience doing science and engineering. We want players to do these things in the game, but also for their experiences in the game to positively affect their lives. So that means we have to give players the chance to experience solving problems with natural systems, with physical systems. They have to develop models of those systems through observation, experimentation, and repetition. That's science in a nutshell. And players really are experimenting in the game. The world is virtual, but the experiment is real. players must really work their way through these tough problems to discover solutions and really develop models so that they can apply the solutions at scale. And because the player has gone through all that effort of understanding and modeling the simulated system, now they're ready to understand and model those systems in the real world. Basically, we're giving them practice identifying and modeling thermodynamics, chemistry, virology, psychology, and more, and the ways in which they're all interconnected. They get to think of the world as a vast interconnected web of systems, of energy and matter, of problems and solutions. People who've played this game look at the ordinary things around them, and they can't help but see the physics, the chemistry, the biology at work. And that's how the experience becomes meaningful. So when I say we want to inspire science, this is what I mean. We want players to practice modeling systems in a simulation so that they can effectively model systems in the real world. Okay, so our goal is to create meaningful experiences within the gameplay. Now we'll show you how we design this and try to stay true to the real world while producing an entertaining game. I think the best way to show this is to drill deeply into one game system so that you can see the choices we made and how the gameplay captures the experience of real physics. The system that we'll look at is thermodynamics. Thermodynamics, the branch of science concerning heat and its relationship to other forms of energy. As I mentioned earlier, our actual process for developing any given system was very loose and often involved lots of iteration over the course of months. For this presentation, though, I'm going to look at 5 problems that we had to solve each time we put a system into the game. First, what is thermodynamics? What is the experience of thermodynamics? What are our game design constraints and our goals for this system? What are our technical constraints and limitations? And what adaptations did we make for accessibility? I'll address each of these, and then we'll see what thermodynamics looks like after we've put it all together in the game. So, let's take a look at what it is about thermodynamics that inspired us and see what aspects of it we want to put into our game. At this point, the designers do lots of open-ended research. It's our job to understand the truth of thermodynamics and determine what effects we want to incorporate into the game and what we'll leave out. We're interested in things like the dynamics of heat, material properties and their responses to heat, the way other forms of energy relate to heat, and of course, the way heat affects ecology, in particular, the lives of the duplicants. After we have a rich understanding of what thermodynamics is, then we need to describe what features give the experience of thermodynamics. So, heat is a process. Heat is a result of processes that the player is interested in. It's something that's always happening, basically whenever other things are happening. Heat diffuses. This might seem simple, but it's really important because it means that heat affects things away from the source. And because of that, temperature is an environmental phenomenon. Everything in a region is thermally connected. And finally, heat matters because the individuals and objects in the environment react to heat. Ice melts, plants wither, duplicants sweat. These are the details that we want players to get so that they can think of the system as a whole and fit it into their world and make decisions about it. They're the details of the experience. Okay, so those are the essential features, but how does it fit into the gameplay of Oni? Well, one of our core design principles is that any solution the player implements should have externalities that drive the need for further solutions. That's the idea that the game is full of needs that the player has to satisfy, so they create a solution, and that solves their need, but the solution has some kind of additional side effect, an externality, that must now be understood and dealt with. Thermodynamics fits extremely well into this design goal, which is the reason I chose to highlight it today. You've got a light bulb that needs lighting, so you build a coal-powered generator. Now you're producing the electricity that you need, but also producing excess heat and smoke for those keeping track. Okay, so we've satisfied the design constraints, and now we have to consider how we're going to simulate the heat. What are our technical constraints? Oni is a cellular automata, or just CA. All the heat and chemical information exists on a grid of 1 cubic meter cells. Every cubic meter cell in the grid is composed of precisely one material, whether solid, liquid, or gas, and it's uniformly dense. In the real world, heat moves along smooth gradients. Materials are composed and layered, and barriers are usually much thinner than 1 meter. But in the artificial universe of Oni, everything is blocky and discrete. Our rendering on the left image gives the impression that it's smooth, but it's just a trick. It's all squares. Because of this, heat in our game doesn't behave like real heat on a small scale at all. It diffuses at the resolution of the grid, and details smaller than the grid size cannot be simulated. But this abstraction allows us to simulate an entire asteroid, including around 100,000 cells and 10,000 game entities at a smooth 30 frames a second. Ultimately, this is the scale that we want the player to be concerned with. So we've optimized the simulation for this level of fidelity. So this CA grid is a constraint that we're building the simulation on. There are other technical considerations that many of the systems bump against, but for thermodynamics in particular, the cellular automata is by far the biggest constraint. So, finally, before we're done, we need to decide which features of thermodynamics we actually want to give to players and how we want to present them. Because no matter how good the simulation is, no one will be able to learn from it or enjoy it unless they understand it. This means reducing complexity while still keeping the experience intact, and making sure that it operates at the right scales for our game. It has to fit the resolution of the simulation, the level of abstraction in our UI, and act on timescales that humans can comprehend. We need to make sure that the system fits smoothly in with the rest of the gameplay. This means we'll have to sacrifice some accuracy if it means that players can really wrap their minds around the big picture. This is a very difficult problem that we've been solving slowly over the course of the project, and even now, by running playtests, getting feedback from players, and of course playing the game a whole lot ourselves. Through testing, it quickly became obvious that being a slave to technical accuracy creates a very rigid and unforgiving simulation. It would be great to teach people all these specific formula, but we want them to see the bigger picture. So we sacrifice the accuracy of systems to make them more accessible. This helps us design the gameplay, helps us simulate the dynamics, and most importantly, helps players understand the overall nature of the systems that they're dealing with. Because ultimately, we don't want the player to only understand how heat works. They need to understand the ecology of the entire game. All the systems in the game are deeply interconnected. The externalities of a player's solutions usually cross over into other systems that they weren't initially concerned with. For example, the player has some duplicants, and they breathe in order to survive. So the player needs to create more oxygen, which they'll extract from water by electrolysis, which takes electricity. But that's going to produce heat, and it will release new chemicals, and so on. The player's solutions must frequently cross these boundaries between systems. But the boundaries of those systems also require effort to make accessible. In an early version of the game, the relationship between electricity and heat was very explicit and accurate. But players were often left in a situation of either producing too little power or frying their base like an egg. So we softened that relationship so that players could explore power generation without having to worry about heat. At first, until it snuck on them an hour later. Basically, we tuned these relationships between systems to capture the experience of the entire world. We throw out the explicit formula so long as we're capturing that experience and getting players thinking about the greater interconnectedness of the systems that they're encountering. So getting back to thermodynamics, let's zoom in and see what we actually implemented. Each cell in the grid has several thermodynamic properties and behaviors, and so do the game entities. Entities are basically everything that isn't part of the grid. Things like machines, the duplicants, plants and animals, loose ore on the ground. Each cell or entity has one material, and that material gives it thermal properties, like heat capacity, its thermal conductivity, and its phase transitions. Whoops. It also has a stored energy, which, combined with its material, will give it temperature. It has a bunch of tuning values to determine its surface area, material boundaries, insulation, and things like that nature. And importantly, entities are aware of where they are in the grid so that they can exchange heat with the cells in the CA. Then, on each iteration of the simulation, every cell conducts heat with its neighbor cells through diffusion and with the game entities on those cells. This iteration is the core of the heat simulation. It's what causes all the heat output from one entity to diffuse out and have an effect on another entity. Each of those entities also has the ability to create or destroy heat on itself, as well as to exhaust heat directly into the air around it. And the entity reacts to heat, becoming productive or unproductive, breaking down, dying, and so on. Those heat creations and reactions are where our game mechanics live. They're also where we link the heat system to all the other systems. All the complexity and details of real thermodynamics has been reduced to this handful of values and behaviors in the simulation. It's been greatly simplified, making it easier to implement and easier for players to comprehend. A big part of the simplification comes from needing to simulate at the correct scale for the game. Because we're interested in the scale of the whole colony, heat diffusion on the CA grid ensures that the heat effects matter at a large scale. So for the entities themselves, the things like machines, creatures, plants, we only care about their external effects, the part where they touch or are touched by the world. The external effects describe how that entity fits into the colony and into the overall ecology. The entity's internal effects are basically at too small of a scale to bother simulating. The entities behave in very simple, binary ways, according to the needs of gameplay. This keeps them readable and understandable, and makes it easier for us to implement and describe to players. Each entity performs simple transformations of one material into another, or of power into heat, and other similar combinations. For example, we have this building which produces plastic out of petrochemicals and electricity. Of course, really making plastic is a complex process, but the game abstracts that away, simply producing the plastic and the heat to imply those internal processes. The amount of heat produced is tuned to create the right kind of externality, rather than being based on some specific formula for plastic. Entities also undergo binary state changes based on their environment and inputs. Like plants, which will change from a healthy state to a wilted state when they get too hot. We don't simulate all the biological factors in a plant. We just have a simple behavior that makes players understand the consequence of heat on plants. The game is full of simple transformations and binary state changes like this, and when you put a whole lot of them together, it creates a living, breathing world full of cause and effect. There are hundreds of entities in the game, each with simple transformations. The player chains these together to reach specific goals without worrying about externalities at first. But at some point, they realize that all these chains involve heat in some way. They suddenly become connected to each other, not by complex mechanics, but by the simple fact that they affect or are affected by heat. At this point, the player is incentivized to abstract the heat mechanics they observe into an underlying model. This makes their problem analysis and solutions easier and more effective. And now that they have this model of heat, it can be related to all the other systems in the game as part of a meta system. So players get practice modeling these complex and interconnected systems, which has obvious value when thinking about the real problems that the world faces today. And while that might seem overwhelming, players are introduced to problems incrementally, and they solve them incrementally. From our playtests, we see the same pattern over and over. First, players learn about the current problems in their colony. They do this by observing behaviors, reading live data, and correlating systems. For example, they see their crops starting to wilt. Then the player starts developing their models of how the game aspects and relationships work together and lead to that behavior, like realizing that the coal generator is a primary source of heat in their colony. Then they'll implement naive, direct solutions, like putting up an insulation barrier between the heat in their farm. And then at this point, they'll realize the externalities and the knock-ons of their solution and repeat the process. This cycle repeats itself many times within a single colony. Players have the opportunity to isolate their thoughts and then integrate them back into the colony. It's a well-orchestrated exercise in model building. And players will realize that the model has to be revisited and improved in order for it to be useful. It's such a powerful way of looking at the world. And even as players iterate on one colony, they're developing models of the systems at different scales. They're building meta models that relate everything they're seeing together and to other future colonies that they've yet to build. The players begin to see the systems all around them, and they notice the unexpected ways that things interrelate to each other. So they'll see a duplicate vomiting on the floor, and the first thought is obviously, what's wrong? How can I help that guy? But then their second thought is, I wonder what the heat capacity of that vomit is. Each time they encounter a system, they'll start isolating its key features, describing it in terms of inputs and outputs, and trying to understand the way that it fits into their colonies. Players begin developing these greater models about how the physics in our game behaves, and patterns of solutions that can be applied to many situations. They'll build prototypes right in the game engine to figure out what all the parts are and how they can be optimized. Then they'll go on the internet, share their explanations with other players, and refine their solutions together. And they'll refine these into the perfect vomit colony. Well, it's someone's idea of the perfect colony anyways. So, players are learning to analyze, to do research, experiment, iterate on their ideas. They're using a variety of processes to develop models, to create abstract rules from their observations. They're taking their general solutions and adapting them into new contexts, and integrating them into local ecologies and infrastructure. In other words, they're doing science and engineering. So, that's how we take a real-world system and turn it into a game system, and how the players learn from it. And that's really fantastic to see happening, but at first I had to wonder, why are people doing all this work? Why are they putting so much effort into such a complicated game? Why are they bothering to actually do all this science? Well, that's easy. The duplicants, our lovable little friends. See, science is really awesome, but it's also kind of scary. People are afraid to play with the real world because they're afraid to fail. And most science is out of reach of the common person because of costs and danger. People don't have the chance to access much real science, or even just to try crazy things. I mean, in the real world, it's impossible for a normal person to lock people in a cave and see if they can survive on their own pee, or to selectively breed animals to find a useful new strain, or to explore volcanic heat for industrial processes. Of course, these situations are a little bit crazy, but they're also a little bit serious. People don't have the chance to just explore crazy ideas and see what they can learn from them. But games provide a special safe place for learning. The fiction in the game provides motivation to pursue learning by creating an artificial world where the player is allowed to make different choices and explore consequences of failure, to learn from mistakes that don't actually cause real harm. But the charm of the duplicants causes us to care about their lives and to try hard to succeed. The fictitious world the duplicants live in lets players feel like they can fail without harming their real life or being judged, like when they fail at school or work. But ironically, This actually allows them to learn and grow in ways that positively affect their real lives by giving them meaningful experiences within the game that they can take into the real world. And very importantly, it seems like players are actually learning to do science. We built this game hoping to get a reaction, and the reactions we've got have overwhelmed our expectations. First, within the game itself, players are digging deep and developing models and reaching systemic conclusions. The game has almost no tutorial and open-ended goals, which means players can only succeed by understanding, experimenting, designing, and refining layered solutions, particular to the rich rules of the simulation. But players are successfully solving their colony's problems anyways. Additionally, we're seeing players demonstrate understanding not just the science in our game, but also science in the real world. People talk about how the systems in the game treat them, so they did their own research and learned more about the reality behind the simulation. We get teachers and educators describing how they use oxygen not included in their classrooms to convey basic principles and encourage deeper exploration of physical systems. And my favorite is that people just start seeing science and engineering everywhere around them. I'll be eating lunch with a coworker, and they'll look at the granite table in front of me, and they'll say, I wonder how much heat this is absorbing right now. Or a friend will point at the ceiling in the mall and wonder, do you think those vents are releasing enough oxygen to displace all the CO2 that we're breathing out right now? So will this game start cranking out scientists and engineers? I don't know. But all the pieces seem to be in place. And I really hope that we've inspired people the way the games I've played inspired me. Of course, we also get lots of feedback about ways the game fails to teach people. It's not perfect, and I'd like to highlight some of the problems we hit. First, the game is extremely complex. It's been very difficult to bring that complexity to players. This is some of the UI that players get to interact with in the game. Many people feel it's needlessly complicated. We could have bent even more rules and simplified the game further to make it more accessible. However, that would have taken away some of the depth. It's a tough choice, and we landed at the level of complexity that we did through a great deal of difficult consideration. But in the end, we're not able to satisfy everyone's learning or entertainment needs at once. And it's not just that our systems are complex. We have a lot of interacting systems, probably too many. People often say they're overwhelmed by the possibilities. This animation shows just some of the overlapping systems that players get to deal with. Again, I see this as sitting on a spectrum between too few and too many systems. No matter how many we add, some people want more, some people want fewer. This is made worse by the fact that Oni is a survival game. In an ideal case, this gives people the motivation they need to face these challenges and overcome them. But for some players, all the overlapping challenges cause a great deal of stress. And this stress ends up working against our goal of having them play with and understand the systems. Both of these problems, however, are emphasized by our biggest struggle. It's incredibly difficult to explain our systems and mechanics through our UI. Our job as the creators of these systems is to make them accessible, but the systems are fundamentally complex, so any UI we build tends towards complexity as well. We've tried to cut and bring clarity, but it's a balancing act. Simplifying too much hides key information about the system and makes understanding impossible. We don't do a great job of helping people understand the fundamental rules of our simulated world. But over the course of this project, we've implemented better explanations and more carefully curated information, and we have watched understanding grow. So I feel we can still help even more people dig into this game, even with the complexity that it has. I could give a whole other talk just about communicating with players in this game. But in spite of these struggles with complexity and communication, it seems that people are really into this crazy game about science. We have glowing reviews. People play the game for enormous amounts of time. Is Daisuke in here? And there's a community of modders, storytellers, and artists, and tools builders, and other amazing people that are pushing the game even farther. As far as success, we could hardly ask for more. There's so many people who have a chance to learn from our systems and to be inspired themselves. So that's the end of our experiment. We found the answer to our question: yes, we can teach people with our game, even as we create entertainment products. We can dare to add just a little bit of real-life value to our product and still succeed. In fact, I think we ended up making a far better game because of the meaningful experiences. It turns out that trying to add real meaning into the game made it really meaningful. Thank you for listening.
ありがとうございます。Thank you very much. それでは、質問の時間、Q&A の時間に入りたいと思います。ご質問ある方、どうぞ手を挙げてください。質問は、日本語でお話しいただきましたら、英語での翻訳をすることができます。ご質問ある方、どうぞ。では、左の後ろの方の方、よろしいでしょうか。
はい、お話ありがとうございました。いくつも質問があるんですけど、ちょっと、とりあえず2つだけ、まとめて質問させていただきたいんです。1つ目は、非常に複雑なコンセプトの、ゲームだと思うんですけれども、チームの中でその方向性を揃えるっていうのはかなり難しかったんじゃないかなと思っていて、そこら辺の苦労が、あったら教えていただきたいですっていうのが1つ目で、もう1つはその中で一番最初のビルド、実装は何から作ったのかっていうところを教えていただきたいです。はい。
Okay. The answer to your first question. Our team is very casual, so consensus was usually reached just kind of through open discussion. Someone would have an idea, we would discuss back and forth, and if it felt right, someone would take charge of it and begin implementing it. And sometimes it wouldn't work, but that was the process. As far as first systems, I believe we started with, it began with the CA, and we had materials, and the gas and liquid flow, and then I think heat was the next thing to come into the game.
なるほど、ありがとうございます。
ありがとうございます。次、右前の方の方、手を挙げていらっしゃいましたかね。すいません、こちらの方へお願いします。
ありがとうございました。実際にゲームを実装していくにあたっていろいろリサーチを行ったと思うんですけれども、自分たちでリアルワールドで実験とかをやったりとかしましたか？例えば実際に 自分で吐いてみてその温度を測ってみたりとかしましたでしょうか。
Not that. Mostly we did online research and very casual experiments. Just kind of what we could observe around us. Again, because we were interested in experience, we were interested in things that we just kind of felt as humans walking down the street. That was what we needed to satisfy. So when we learned something, we would go outside and kind of observe it in the real world. But we almost never did practical experiments.
ありがとうございます。
ありがとうございます。他にご質問ある方いらっしゃいますか？どうぞ手を挙げてください。では真ん中、後ろの左側の真ん中のやつ、後ろからお願いします。
はい、自分もこのゲームすごい楽しんで遊んでます。このゲームが面白いと確信できたのはどの要素が入った時ですか
？I'm still not sure. I think we always believed because we found these things interesting, we believed that others would find them interesting also. And the challenge was only in communicating that excitement.
ありがとうございます。Thank you.
ありがとうございます。次にご質問ある方いらっしゃいますか？では、いないので、右前の。
Go ahead. It's okay. Anything.
何でも良いので、ご質問どうぞ。
はい、ありがとうございます。すごい好きで、オキシジェン・ノット・インクルーデッド・ミニ・カンファレンスとか、イベントをやったりとか、あとはウェブ上でちょっとコミュニティ的なものをやったりとかもしているんですけれども、そういったところでなんかこうちょっと使えるようなアセットとかそういったものの提供とかってできますか
？Yeah, I mean, we love supporting our community. Through early access. For those who don't know, the game was in testing for about 2.5 years before launch, and many of our wonderful players helped us with that. So we definitely want to support communities. We're a small team, as I mentioned, and making asset packages takes someone's time. It's something I personally want to do. Actually, I have started gathering some together, but it's a process that takes time. I hope I can get it to you soon.
はい、ありがとうございます。
ありがとうございます。他にご質問ある方、では真ん中の方で。
ありがとうございます。導入するのが最も難しかったシステムは何でしたか？
Disease, definitely. It was particularly challenging because disease is hostile. So trying, like plumbing is productive. When you add pipes, your base becomes bigger and stronger. But when we put disease in the game, we kind of only made your base worse. And so it was a real challenge to try creating fun out of that. As well, biology is complex, and the rules of the CA limited us. We can only have one disease per cell in the CA, as with everything. And so trying to decide a set of rules that would simulate viral growth while still working on the CA grid was extremely challenging. We had many iterations of it, and it's still kind of under iteration.
ありがとうございます。
ありがとうございます。次の方よろしくお願いします。
セルオートマトンでそのシミュレーションを行うっていう割り切りが結構すごいなと思ったんですけれども、どういうふうにして思いついたのかなっていうのをお伺いしたくて、最初からセルオートマトンでやるって決めてたのか、それともちょっと別の試してみてやっぱりこっちだとその性能が出ないから、割り切ろうっていうふうにしたのか、ちょっとその辺をお聞かせいただければ。
So there's a little Java game called World of Sand. It's an old browser game with a CA, and you can add different materials, sand and water and gunpowder and these things. And one of the developers was very inspired by it and wanted to build his own CA. And when we started talking about this game, that was in the back of our minds. They have many good properties, like they are memory efficient and they have known complexity. And so that was just kind of the direction we went with. Other alternatives were discussed later on, but from the beginning, that's what it always was.
Thank you.
ありがとうございます。あと2つぐらい質問をする時間がございます。他にご質問、よろしいですか。お願いします。
はい。科学を学ぶっていうことがコンセプトだったんですけども、学校教育とかを参考にしたりはしたんでしょうか。
No. At the very beginning, we didn't know how much we wanted to teach science. We just had a very small idea, and it grew very slowly. So we didn't even realize what we had, I think. We kind of hoped, but we didn't know. And it's only recently, now that the game is launched, that we've kind of started thinking about using this for real education and learning from real educators about how they might be using the game and the kinds of lessons that they might want to teach with it. So that's still kind of an open question. Did that answer your question?
Thank you.
ありがとうございます。他にご質問ある方いらっしゃいますか。ちょうど2人ぐらい。
ありがとうございます。すごい楽しいゲームと思って僕も結構やってるんですけども、失敗した時のリカバリーがすごく難しいゲームだと思っていて、実際ユーザーにはどれぐらいのイテレーションで成功と失敗のサイクルを繰り返してもらうとか、どれぐらいのプレイ時間で学んでもらいたいと思ってデザインしているのかっていうのを知りたいです。
The answer to that actually varies a huge amount between players, from player to player. There are some people on the team who have never gotten past cycle 50, and they just keep playing the first bit over and over and over and over and over and over and over, trying to just perfect the beginning of the game. And that's okay because they're having fun, and they're still trying, and they're still improving. And there are other players who will never let a colony fail. The very first colony they start, they get, to cycle 1000 because they go slowly and methodically, and that's okay too because they're having fun. So for us, it's more about, is the game supplying people with the entertainment and learning that we want it to? And the way they approach it is up to them.
ありがとうございます。僕は最初の50サイクルで全員ストレスで発狂して死んじゃいました。はい。
Perfect.
ありがとうございます。すいません、もうお時間となってしまいましたので、以上にて質問の時間終了させていただきます。本日の同時通訳はハミ株式会社様のご協賛により提供いただいております。どうもありがとうございます。それでは。
Graham, just one last question. 漂白石精錬機が欲しいんですけど、Can we get a bleachstone generator?
We'll see.
Thank you.
Mr. Graham, thank you very much.